And welcome back, everybody, to the California Small Farm Conference. My name is Evan Wigg. I'm with Community Alliance with Family Farmers, and we are very excited to have you here for what is the final workshop of the virtual element of our conference. We are going to be talking about corporate land grabs, consolidation, equity, and access on California's farms. So big thank you to all of our speakers who are here to talk about this big, meaty, and complex topic that is also incredibly pressing. So thank you so much for being here. And also to everybody at home, thank you all for being here to engage on this topic. I want to encourage people to use the chat feature down at the bottom of your screen to interact, ask questions, and maybe share resources of your own related to today's topic. And with that, today's workshop is being recorded. We'll share this with folks after the conference. And with that, I will pass the mic. Thank you, Jamie. I'll let you take it away from here.
Thanks, Evan. Yeah, I'm really excited about this session. My name is Jamie Fanous. I'm the policy director at CAF. I will just set the stage for everyone, and then I will hand it over to our amazing moderator, Nicole. In terms of just laying out the landscape here, I just want to offer up some important information as it comes to California and the nature and the status of small-scale farmers. So ultimately, in California, over 80% of farms operate on less than 180 acres. And nearly 75% of farmers operate on less than $100,000 in annual gross sales. And we are losing at least 4 small-scale farmers a day. These challenges are quite overwhelming and make the simple act of growing food to feed local communities an impossible task. From the realities of the climate crisis to the supply chain and greater economic impacts, those who are making a living supporting food, including the 1 in 5 California farmers who identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, it's increasingly impossible. When we use terms like land access or equity or security, that also means not only the ground we stand on, but access to the resources such as water or capital infrastructure and housing to live a whole and full life and thrive as a farmer. In California, land reform is essential and critical today, as 50% of California's cropland is owned by 5% of the total landowners. I want to repeat that so it's clear. That means 5% of total landowners own over half of California's cropland. Meanwhile, 85% of the smallest properties account for only 25% of that cropland. And finally, almost about 40% of cropland is rented or leased by non-farmers. So this landscape means that unless you have $1 million laying around, gaining access to secure lands is impossible. The only entities that have the ability to purchase land in California are large corporations, hedge funds, investment firms, and as we have seen in the most recent news, tech billionaires, all of whom are not local farmers. Today, we're going to have a really awesome conversation around these challenges and what they really look like on the ground and what are the efforts being done to turn it all around. So with that, I will hand it over to Nicole to introduce our amazing panelists and moderate this great session. Thanks so much, Nicole.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Yeah, just quick intros for myself, and then I'll go around and call on everybody to explain who they are and why they're here. But my name is Nicole Foy. I am currently a reporting fellow for ProPublica, but before that, I was on the California Divide team for Central California, covering the Central Valley, where I grew up. I was born outside Sacramento and then raised in Bakersfield. And so these are issues covering agriculture, farm workers, access to resources has been something that I've always been concerned about for my reporting career, and it was very exciting to come back and get to do that work in the area and the state where I grew up. So I'm going to go around and call on everybody to introduce themselves. So Alexis, can you go first and tell us about who you are and why you're here?
Thank you. My name's Alexis Kofod. I own a small farm with my husband in Northern California. It's called Soul Food Farm, and we have diversified portfolio. We are primarily olive oil producers, but also flower farmers. And in the last 3 years, we've been working really hard on building a farm stand that buys from the local farming community, to have everything in one place for people to access. And that simple idea has been extraordinarily challenging, but we're really committed to that, leveling the playing field and for small farmers in our community and working with them as partners and colleagues, instead of each of us working on our own private holdings. So yeah, I'm very glad to be here. And also, and I should mention, since the topic is about land access and land grabs, is that I live in the county where the Flannerly Group has just bought 66,000 acres of farmland and taken it off the market in their bid to build a housing development. So this topic of land grabs and displacement of farmers is front and center of what's happening in my county at this moment.
Thank you so much. Robbie, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Robbie Jaffe, and along with my husband, we farm in the Cuyama Valley, which is a small valley immediately to the west of the southern Santa Cruz, west of Bakersfield. It runs east-west into Santa Barbara County. And we got land there in 1993, thinking we were going to be in the middle of nowhere and that we'd be able to just farm the way we wanted to farm. And along came all sorts of issues that we've become really involved in. So we have a 5-acre organic dry farmed vineyard and olive orchard. And we in 2014, as most folks probably are aware of, the state passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and identified Cuyama as one of the 21 critically overdrafted basins in the state. That's a state with almost 600 water basins. And these 21 had to come up with a groundwater sustainability plan. And we've been very, very involved in that over the last 10 years. And what we've run into, what the key things and what's really important is that is the reality that not only is it hard for new farmers to access land, but it's also who, just as Jamie said, who controls the land, and not only who controls the land, but who controls the resources. And for decades, there have been studies on corporate farms and the impact they have on rural communities where all the money is extracted from the community. But now what we're seeing is what happens when all the resources, especially in California, the water is taken up by the big corporations, and all of their produce is extracted, shipped worldwide, and is just purely for investments. So Cuyama is sort of a microcosm, I think, of what's happening in the state. We have the 2 largest carrot growers in the world, Grimway and Bolthouse, and they pump 66% of the water in our basin. And they have tremendous control of what happens on our groundwater sustainability plan. And they've also filed an adjudication against every landowner in the valley. And then we also have the investment of Harvard University's endowment fund, their management corporation, which is it's over a $50 billion endowment fund, has planted 1,000-acre vineyards since the passing of Sigma. And they've drawn down the water table in their area, which had been dry range land. In just 7 years, they've drawn it down over 100 feet. So we're watching our water being extracted And and as it dries up, what'll happen is they'll pull out, and what will they leave the community with? And that's a lot of what we're grappling with.
Thank you so much. And the last person who needs an introduction, the Senator.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Hurtado, State Senator representing District 16. So for those that are not familiar with it, it stretches from the city of Kingsburg in Fresno County down to basically the Grapevine. So I cover the counties of Tulare, Kings, Kern, and a part of Fresno. And I currently also sit as the chair for the California State Senate Agriculture Committee. I was appointed last year. It's been an honor of a lifetime. It has very limited jurisdiction. So I did put in a request this year to expand the jurisdiction of the Agriculture Committee, because there's a lot of issues that are occurring specifically within the sector that it can't really address or talk about it publicly without having, some sort of jurisdiction to be able to have a hearing on these issues that are important to all of us. And so my parents worked in agriculture. They immigrated from Mexico, and being in the state Senate as the daughter of immigrants, as a daughter that grew up watching her parents work in agriculture, I know the hard work that is put into it. I value the work that, from the farmer, down to the packing houses, without people involved in that system, there is no food. And we all eat. We all need food to survive. And for me, I've taken a different approach to agriculture in my time in the state Senate. It's required a lot more education in terms of what agriculture means. And I got started in the Senate back in 2019, talking about water infrastructure and talking about how that was a food security issue. And people were like, wait a minute, how is that possible? And I said, yes, the water that goes through here, our farmers rely on. And if they don't have, the water that they need to grow the food, then it becomes a food security issue. And, now I'm talking a lot more about food security and a food system and how it's tied into energy, how it's tied to water. There's a nexus there between food, water, and energy. And so we can't really talk about just agriculture or just food. It's really the system that includes that everything within the food system, right? And that includes the workers, that includes energy, that includes groundwater. And so and I've been very much working on advocating for water for farmers. But once the pandemic hit, that really took a different turn. What I started witnessing was just a lot of chaos, quite frankly, a lot of chaos. There was a lot more. I started seeing a lot more for sale signs for of farms. People were, farmers really struggling. And I said, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? It just seems like something's going on. But sure enough, it was Sigma's just playing a huge role into it. Not getting enough water allocations from the state. All these things were playing a role, and a lot more people began to ask and question, well, who's buying up these farms, and they're tied with water, like who's behind them? And they didn't really know, and I can't say that I really know to this day who is behind some of those land purchases. But what I do know is that we're seeing chaos get even worse. If that's even possible, it is in this situation where one is the purchase of all this agricultural land, and then on top of that, it's the lawsuits that are coming in by these individuals that have a lot more money than who knows how much money they have at hand, but it seems like they seem to flex their power with it. On top of that, you have disease, you have issues with some of these landowners that are neglecting or impacting water infrastructure. And those are all costs to the taxpayers, to Californians, that really they shouldn't be responsible for if it's being done by large landowners. And it's really important that we do more work in this space. And that's what I'm doing here in the state Senate. I have been working on legislation from banning foreign governments from owning agricultural land in the state of California. I thought, well, that should be an easy no-brainer, right? But because I knew that it was, I can't really say this farm or that farm is foreign owned because I don't know. Sometimes it's difficult even trying to understand who are the actual owners behind a specific property or land. And then on top of that, we just, we knew that it was investors, right? Or some sort of, an LLC. But I also knew that trying to ban, for example, an LLC or a company from owning agricultural land, well, that wasn't going to get me really far. I thought, well, maybe we just make it specific to foreign governments, and it will be much easier to get past. First year, it went through the legislature without any issues. Then it got vetoed by the governor, and then we tried again the second time, and the second time it died in the state appropriations committee. And so we're back at it again. I mean, I'm learning a lot about kind of what the trends are, further looking into the issues of how all this is tied together about water, food, and energy. We did, a couple of colleagues and I did a letter to the U.S. Department of Justice asking them to look into water rights abuses in the West, because it's not something that I'm just seeing in the Central Valley or in my Senate district. We're seeing in other parts of the state, and we're seeing it in Western states. I've actually been connecting a whole lot with a new friend, a county supervisor out of the state of Arizona, who's also been seeing a lot of these similar issues in her county, in her state. And so it's not just the Central Valley, it's not just California, it's Western states. And why? Well, because we're just, as the governor says, the wets are getting wetter and the hots are getting hotter, or something along those lines. I guess I'll try to paraphrase him, but that's a reality of the West. And when you have a precious natural resource like water that's becoming much more limited in a growing region, then it becomes a lot more profitable. So and then there's a whole lot more that's tied to that. I'm happy to talk about it some more and go a little bit more in depth. But it's such an honor to be here with you all today, and I look forward to getting to hear from all of you and sharing some more information.
Thank you so much, Senator, and thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. I just want to remind also just anyone who's watching this in the audience that we are going to be taking questions from you all towards the end. So if you can put them, you can wait until the end, or you can start putting your questions into the Q&A now, so we can kind of make sure that we get them addressed. But just want to make sure everyone is aware that that Q&A function is available, and then we will be taking questions from the audience later on. But first, I want to just kind of, a lot of this are things that everyone kind of hinted at as they were giving their introductions. A lot of this may be things that each of you are dealing with your daily work, but I was wondering if you could kind of just big picture for us, tell us, what do you believe are the most pressing problems facing California's small farmers, particularly farmers of color? What are the most pressing problems, whether they're just starting out or trying to hold on to property or land or a farm that they already had, maybe was already in the family? I don't know who wants to answer that first. I can call on folks, but Alexis, you're unmuted. You can go.
There were several questions in there. I think one of the first questions you asked was, what are the most pressing problems as an existing farmer that I see in the farming community? And it's interesting how the answer to that question has changed over time. it's the answer I'm going to give you now is not the one I would have given you when I started farming 25 years ago as a young woman in a man's dominated field. So in that respect, I'm so happy to see so many women farmers now. That's a great trend. But one of the challenges I see now are sort of twofold. In regards to land grabs and tech billionaires buying land, you know, you cannot dictate to people who they sell their land to. And nobody would ever want to have that sort of legislated. But what we can do and take a stronger role in, I think, at a legislative level is keeping land zoned agriculture. So while there are big hedge funds buying ag land and extracting the resources of it, that's one problem. But when you have what's going on in Solano County with the Flannery Group buying ag land, taking it out of ag completely, threatening to use the aquifer to supply water for their new housing community when it's a water resource that Solano County relies on for all its citizens. I think when you have those types of scenarios, the most important thing in that situation is to keep land zoned agriculture. And that's a very complicated issue because you have these tech billionaires suing the farmers that they actually bought land from and farmers who refuse to sell to them as well. So it's a very dirty and complicated situation. But what we're looking at now is them trying to change the general plan so that that land will be rezoned. And that to me is something that's probably going on throughout California. And once you start rezoning ag land, that's to me, a very dangerous series of events, because once it's rezoned, once you've cut the trees down, once you've eradicated the wildlife, once you've extracted the resources, that's it. It's over. And as Senator Hurtado mentioned, and Robbie mentioned about food security, this is closely linked to food security. Maybe 50 years ago, 60 years ago, we wouldn't have seen the diminishment of natural resources in the same way. But now we can look at the diminishment of resources as not just water, but the genetic material of plants and animals as well. And so it's a food security issue, but it's also a biodiversity security issue. So I think we have to look at land grabs and the rezoning of ag land in a much more sober way, because now we know once we lose biodiversity, once we lose genetic material, once the water's gone, we're not getting it back. And that's a very slippery slope and a very fragile and insecure place to be, just as human beings and citizens on the planet. You asked about the challenges, I think, also of people of color and younger people to farm. I think that was what you also asked. Well, obviously, land is extraordinarily expensive, and I think also we seem to have. It's very difficult for people in agriculture. I think my observation is that it's very difficult for people in agriculture to reinvent or restructure or be flexible in redesigning what agriculture can be and can look like. We want it to do it the way our grandparents did it and the way our parents did it, and you got to put that's old, that's history, that's the past. The world is changing so rapidly and our resources are getting so limited. We need to be flexible and think about innovative and creative ways to farm and to farm collectively. So I don't expect young people to come up with the kind of money they need to farm, buy a piece of land, but there are numerous ways for young people to get into farming. And I think one of the most powerful ones, and and one that I wish had been around as a thought in my mind when I started farming was to farm as a group, as a collective, and everybody sort of participate in holding that land together as colleagues and partners. Because I mean, yeah, I mean, when you look at the value of land in California, it's just not going to be a possibility in any other way. And as far as being a minority in, you know, a woman or a person of color or, you know, uh, whatever, however you identify, those are prejudices that are not really, in my experience, tied to land. They're tied to access and accessibility to loans and to money and to finance. And so before you even get to the land, you have these barriers standing in your way. And anyway, I'll leave it there. I know other people have thoughts that they'd like to share.
No, it's great. Thank you, Robbie. Any thoughts there on the most pressing problems that you think are facing small farmers in California, maybe some that you're experiencing?
Sure. Yeah, this is amazing. So I'd like to sort of try to build on what Senator Hurtado and Alexis has said. And I think the idea of taking a systems approach is very important, both on the ecosystem level, which Alexis referred to, and all the infrastructure level, which Senator Hurtado referred to. And we need to change the system. We need a total paradigm shift if we're going to support small farmers, because farming isn't this, I know, in school or whatever, we sort of grow up with this idea of the happy farmer on the tractor, just, operating as this individual. And that's not how it works. It's a very integrated system. And the question becomes, how do you set up the infrastructure to support small farmers, to support new farmers, to give access? And there are ways to do it. There are models in California where this is happening, but how do we build those and strengthen them is the question. I mean, you look at something like Alba in Salinas, which has for decades has established a program of where farm workers become farmers. And they have a whole stage process and educational program to do this that's been really, really successful. But it's not just about the farm, then it's about the market. And how do you create a local market that establishes food security for regions? And how can the small farmer tie into that? The corporate farms and the hedge funds and the investment firms have no interest in any of that. They're about extracting money and resources. And that's pretty much it. So we need to figure out, what do we value in farming? And California has the most, has the capacity throughout our state to basically grow everything. And so how do we do that to really create regional secure food systems where small farmers can thrive? And I think it's a really big shift. I think it's happening in pockets. But I think, and I'm really excited, Senator Hurtado, to hear the types of legislation you're working on, because I think having that legislative support, first things like setting up food hubs, where that can be a resource for basically getting financial support for new farmers. It also could be a place that has equipment to share, can have refrigeration and that kinds of things to store food. It's just there's lots of possibilities to do it, but we need to proactively put those systems in place.
Yeah, that's really good segue into, asking you, Senator. You mentioned, legislation regarding foreign corporations and their ability to own land in California. So I wonder if you could expand a little bit more on that, and also maybe tell us anything else that you're working on here that you think would particularly benefit some of California's smaller farmers who are facing some of these issues?
Yeah, so, back when I first got started in state senate well, I got elected in 2018 and sworn in that year, at the end of that year, I started, really diving into water. And so it's been the usual, the usual conversation when it comes to water in the district that I represent. But I dug into it a little bit more. And what I learned is that there's this one report on global water security. And so we often talk about climate change here in Sacramento and the things that we got to do to tackle climate change. But one of the biggest, threats to us, right, as humans, is climate change. What it does to food, what it means for water security. And so when I read this report on global water security, it really made me think a lot more about the impacts, right? It spoke to how it had the ability to, water could be weaponized, and water could be used to gain leverage from one country over another. And as we were going through the pandemic, I mean, it really made me think about, well, because the one thing that I'd also touched on was social disruption, right? Which, we've seen in other countries that they're more impoverished and are struggling with democracy. And a lot of it is in part tied to food and tied to just a lot of social disruption in those countries, right? And so I know that it seems like something that will not ever happen here. There's just not that possibility to happen here. But these threats become much more reality even in a prosperous country like ours, because that's what climate change is doing to all of us. And so water security is something that we need to be thinking a lot more and how it could be used as leverage or as a weapon. And we saw, of course, what has been going on in Ukraine and how food has been weaponized. Again, food, water, and energy are connected. And so it wasn't, so I started doing legislation knowing, well, I want to make sure that we continue to provide and grow the food to feed people all over the world. And I think here in California, we really embrace that in the ag community. Is we love what we do. We want to continue doing it, and we want to be able to feed people all over the world. And it's not like we just want to grow for ourselves, but it really also made me think about, this is really a national security issue that we need to make sure that we are more closely monitoring our water, that we're able to continue to produce food here in the state, that we're not like importing more food. Because when you have, particular foreign countries, or any foreign country really having control over your food supply, that's a real scary thing. And I think that if you look at what's going on with the price, it doesn't even have to be really a foreign country. It could be just an investor that has acquired land and across the food supply chain, and that's a scary thing, because you begin to see the cost of things going up, and people begin to feel we're just unhappy. We can't afford it, right? It's becoming, and we're seeing a lot of that. And so I wanted to, like I said, in part it was like, well, we can't really target or limit, or it would be just such difficult legislation to really target banning, investors from owning agricultural land. And maybe it would be best if we just target, foreign governments, but that turned out to be difficult as well. So, I'm just continuing to try one way or another to try to have some accountability and transparency, because I can't, like I said, I can't really pinpoint and say, okay, well, this land is owned by a foreign government, because part of the other challenge that I have come across and understood is that when there's LLCs involved and they're buying up land, they're just anonymous buyers. So you don't really know if at the end of the day they're connected to a foreign entity or a foreign government, and you may not even immediately recognize if they're connected to a foreign government. So it's something that's really beyond my scope, beyond the scope of the state. It's something that really I think really needs to be up to FinCEN to determine if anything is foreign owned. I know that they're working on that, and so I figured, well, if I do this legislation, at least we'll let the feds do the work that they need to do, because with the Corporate Transparency Act and the implementation of it, the rulemaking is going into effect this year. And I figured, well, that at least that would give us a little bit of time to make sure that that we don't have a lot of transition in land, but it's happening, it's occurring, and I'm afraid that we're already a little too far and too deep.
Thank you. And I wanna switch to another question here that has kind of been, I feel like, hinted at by some folks, and I want to really hear some more thoughts. But there seems to be, I think maybe several people on this panel are maybe of the opinion that small farmers in particular can really play a really important role in preserving California's agricultural land, maybe even compared to larger corporations. And I'm curious if any of you would like to break that down about if you do think that is true and why you think that. Alexis, do you want to start?
This is my favorite topic. Thank you. I love this question. I feel so strongly that small family farmers have a role to play. During COVID, when supply chains collapsed, we had this moment in time when the stores were finally raided, and the farmers were the ones who stepped in and started moving food and distributing food. And their CSA started exploding across the country. Farmers markets had the highest attendance they'd ever had. And there was just this great moment to observe that small farmers have this critical role to play in food security and in commerce. And unfortunately, after COVID, all the regulations and all the rules that have sort of been oppressive to small farmers kind of came back into force. And farmers were sort of forced to step back a little bit from some of the really innovative ways to distribute food and to build their businesses. Small farmers, in the end of the day, need to have financial stability. Farming is the business. We're stewards of the land. We're animal managers. We have multiple roles that we're playing that are deeply important. But at the end of the day, it's the business. And at this moment in time, I don't know any small farmers at my level that can pay the mortgage selling carrots. Like, it's tough. But where I see the disconnect for small farmers is that when they try to be innovative, when they try to be creative and come up with really unique ways of commerce that benefits and is specific to them, that they often find that permitting fees are very punitive, or the regulations in their county are very difficult, or designed for larger scale corporations, grocery stores, etc., and they don't really fit into the framework. So when they go to their resource management offices or municipalities, they're told they can't do things because they just don't fit into that space. But I think this is where we have room to improve the culture and the situation, is the policies and the legislation that our representatives are working so hard at the state level to create, to make things better for the small farmer, need to have a more positive trickle-down effect to the different counties and their resource management offices, so that farmers can access these pieces of legislation to benefit themselves. It's very frustrating for all the farmers I know to see legislation pass and then to approach their municipality and be told it doesn't apply in this county. You can't do it in this county. And what that ends up doing is that it stops the financial stability for that farmer to move through the season, to move from one crop through a crop loss to the next season, or even, God forbid that they have a great season and they're actually making money, and to really leap off that success to the next level. And so as a small farmer, as a woman farmer, I feel like there's these little disconnects that don't quite trickle down from the federal state level down to the smaller government bodies in counties in California that encourage farmers to try innovative ways to collaborate with each other or to build their businesses. For example, maybe using agritourism as a vehicle to enhance their financial well-being. So, yeah, I think there needs to be a level playing field. And I think that permitting fees need to be within the scale and scope of what farmers can afford. It's there's no advantage to over-regulating us or asking us to pay exorbitant permit fees to do simple things like build some housing on our properties for labor, or to get solar panels so that we can have a little bit of an edge when the PG&E turns off power for days and days and days, and we need solar to get water to our animals, just sort of basic things. And yeah, I'm speaking for myself in my county because that's my experience, but I think that I'm speaking for all the farmers in this county when I say that sometimes it's just it's so difficult that it's easier to sell your land and just go away. That's what happens. The question earlier, and I'm sorry to take up so much time, but the question has been, why would people, or sort of the implication was, why would people sell to big corporations? Why would they sell their farmland? And it's such a varied answer, but in the end, it usually comes to financial stability. People either want to be financially stable or leave a financial legacy for their children, who oftentimes don't want to be farmers because they see what their parents are doing and they see how hard it is. Where in actuality, there's so much we could put in place to make farming viable, successful for everybody involved, so that you don't feel this pressure to sell your farm for cash, because you actually go, well, money's nice. Your money sounds tempting, but my farm is stable. I'm making a good living. I actually have enough going on here that I can leave it to my children, and they're interested because they can see that it's a stable career. And those are the little holes in the game at the moment that make it so easy for corporations and tech billionaires to walk in and buy land. Of course, now they're clearly offering, money that's so impossible to say no to when you're offering someone $10 or $15 million for your land. I think, what I'm saying doesn't mean anything, but in general, if you're trying to keep people to hold on to their family legacies, their family land, small farmers to not give up and to keep on farming, there has to be a level playing field.
Senator, I want to give you a chance to, Alexis mentioned a lot of things regarding, like policy set at the state level that when they trickle down to the counties don't quite work out. So if you have any response or thoughts in that you can share in
Absolutely. I have a lot. Yeah, I think that this is my second term, right, in the Senate, and a big frustration of mine, and not throwing anyone under the bus by any means, But one of my biggest frustrations is that sometimes we have policies, well-intentioned policies, and we'll have, ex-lobbyists that will come in, say, can you carry this bill? And it has to do with agriculture or rural communities. And most oftentimes it's sponsored by someone that's not from an ag district. And they feel compassionate about helping, workers or or farmers, small farmers in those communities. But if you don't really grow up around it, if you don't go back to a district that is ag and hear from your constituents often, then you're going to just have a different perspective that is not necessarily the reality. And so a lot of what I've been focused on, again, is really just trying to educate people on a lot of these issues that we're facing in agriculture. And so just because it sounds like a good thing doesn't mean that it's a good thing, and so, some of these policies, again, they sound good, there's probably good intentions, but they end up not necessarily working out for our communities, our ag community. And so it's a challenge in itself that I think we got to continue working. Most small farmers are busy working their lands. They don't have time to go and advocate for themselves. But it goes back to sometimes these investors are also involved. They have lobbyists. They have the ability to hire lobbyists to carry legislation for them, to make it sound like something that has nothing to do with ag, right? And something good, and it ends up harming farmers. And I know you touched a little bit earlier on what is the biggest challenge. I mean, I think personally one of the biggest challenges in agriculture is AI, artificial intelligence. I don't think we all realize or understand to the extent that AI is playing in agriculture, but it is. I mean, I think that's why you're seeing and feeling the harms that you're feeling, because data and public information that is tied to your farm or to you it could be weaponized against you, and you don't even know it, and I don't even know it. I can't even say for sure that it's happening, but it's something that it's fairly new, and I do feel that it's being weaponized against you when it comes to water, when it comes to your land, when it comes to even pesticide use. There's a lot that is going on that we don't really see behind the scenes. A lot of it, like I said, I don't think it's necessarily, yes, it's policy. Sometimes it's policies, but more than anything, I just think that there's just some bad actors out there that are really looking at farms or agriculture as just a way to make a lot of money. I mean, I've heard some people say that the next billionaires are going to come out of agriculture. And so I think that there's a lot of people who are investing in it with this idea that there's a lot of money in there that farmers haven't taken advantage of. And if the land goes up for sale, that's a huge profit that they'll end up making. But instead, what we're seeing is farmers selling, farmers are going bankrupt, less food production. And so those are all things that we should all be concerned about.
We have some very good questions already in the Q&A, but before we turn to those, Robbie, I want to give that original question to you to give you a chance to answer. Do you have any thoughts on what role small farmers can play in preserving California's agricultural land, whether that's from your own experience or just your own thoughts?
Okay, thanks. I'll try to be brief. I think the small farmers are key to preserving at least my vision and my goal for what I would like to see California agriculture look like. And I think a key part of that is, what do we want rural communities in California to look like? And what we've seen is some of the poorest, most underserved areas of California are the rural communities, with access to clean drink, or lack of access to clean drinking water, lack of access, food insecurity in our valley, in the Cuyama Valley. To get to the nearest grocery store, you have to drive an hour. There are no banks in our community. I mean, there's such little access. And because, and a lot of that has come out of the land being controlled by corporate farms and all of the resources, none of the money staying in the community. The money's all leaving the community. So there's no cycle. There's no cycling back of money earned into the community. There's no needs for any kind of, or no access to any kind of banks or anything when the corporate farms are headquartered in Bakersfield and all of the money's going there. So I think that's the real challenge. And to me, the counter, what I'd love to see happen is the strengthening of small farms so that this can be built. And as Alexis said, you know, that there's access and there's a stability of like, oh yeah, I'm not just going to become a small farmer or maintain my small farm and be struggling and figuring out, you know, how am I going to resource the farm? How am I going to market this stuff? It's like, how do I work together and make that happen? And so I go back to that. We really need to set up it's a different infrastructure that will support rural communities and support small farmers.
Can I just pop in and quickly from what you just said, because it was so powerful, Robbie, and I just wanted to share with the people on this call or this webinar that there are numerous studies that show that when you shop at a corporate store, that dollar, every dollar you spent at that corporate store leaves the community instantaneously. And when you shop at locally owned family businesses, those dollars circulate in your community 7 to 9 times. That's an incredibly powerful way to build financial stability and resilience in communities. And I think that that's why, as Robbie's mentioning, it's so important to have local businesses and small farms in your community because you're building longevity and resilience. I just wanted to throw that in there. Thank you.
That's great. It's been, I think everyone has a lot of thoughts on this topic, and it's what's making a discussion like this so engaging. I'm gonna just switch over and start pulling some questions from the chat and the Q&A here. I think the first one, actually, Senator, might be a good one to throw to you first, actually, which is what would it take to get California to more fundamentally invest in small farmers and perhaps box out investment farms?
Well, I think it's going to take a lot more of your input coming in directly to our leadership, to the administration, making sure that your voices are heard, because, you know, there's only so much that as a policymaker, as a chair of the Senate Ag Committee, that I can do. I think that people really need to, at least here in Sacramento, really need to hear from all of you and as many people as possible, because I think that's what's going to start, you know, really changing the conversation and so people understand. And I'll tell you that the more that farmers have become vocal about the issues that they're facing, the more I'm hearing about it, the more curiosity, the more interest in creating that change for you all. I know I had a colleague that represents a different area, you know, a coastal community that has ag, and it wasn't until you know, that representative started to hear from her constituents that we started talking a lot more about SGMA and farmers and the issues that they're facing. And so because look, again, I believe that policy solutions need to really come directly from the individuals that are impacted the most, and that means all of you. And first and foremost, people need to know that there's an issue that you're being impacted by, and then second, it's getting your ideas and putting them into action. Because again, I don't want someone that is not struggling or that thinks they know about what the struggles that you're going through to come up with some piece of legislation that at the end of the day is going to end up hurting you more. And so we do need to change our food system, and we do need to make sure that that input comes directly from those that are being impacted the most.
Alexis or Robbie, do you have any questions to add there? Anything that you've seen work for getting folks more invested, I guess, in preserving small farms?
I guess I would say that it can happen, yes, the legislation can be really supportive and it can set up systems to make that function, but it also can happen on a community basis. It can have, the light bulbs go off in the community, people start doing innovative things. That's how farmers markets started in California in the 1970s. And that gave a whole market to small farmers that we didn't have before. So it can happen on a grassroots level. And so I think that's a real place of empowerment for people. It's great. I support, people like Senator Hurtado moving forward with legislation that supports that and all the work CAF does around policy. And I think we have to have that happening at the local level as well.
Another question I want to pull from the chat and the Q&A is, can urban farmers play a role in these discussions, especially when we're talking about, preserving ag land at large or supporting small farmers? They are, the person who asked this question points out that they are almost always small farmers if we're talking about urban farms. So what role can they play in all of this? I don't know who wants to answer that one.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I think we're all in this together. I think that it's detrimental to our collective goals to classify everybody in these different categories. If you're planting things in the ground, if you're growing food, if you're feeding people, we're all in this together. And trees and birds and roots of trees, they don't see boundaries. People who are moving through communities, visiting farms and gardens and urban spaces, they don't see boundaries. We see them because we live in them and we know where our lanes are and where the county ends and the cities begin. But people are they're drawn to all of it, and we're all contributing to the common good and the common goal of saving diversity, saving genetic material, growing heirloom vegetables, accessing clean water, rebuilding our soils, healthy soils. So for me personally, I think that the role for urban farmers is that they already have their role. They created their role. They are already part of the whole. And I think we are all participating in our sphere of influence, doing what we can, and it's all important, actually. My 2 cents.
I want to make sure I get a couple more of these questions in before we switch to closing remarks from everyone. But there's been a couple of questions about possibly lowering regulatory hurdles, either on stuff like secondary farm uses, like agritourism. Another question mentions maybe some regulations that were built for large farms in mind that can sometimes be really burdensome for smaller farmers, or maybe not quite make sense in the policy. I'm curious if there's anything in particular that comes to mind for the three of you that could be helpful in maybe removing barriers or difficulties that small farmers may face.
So as a state legislator here, I will say that there's plenty that we can do. I mean, I have an entire list of things that we could possibly do. Again, the challenge is getting that legislation through and then getting it implemented is the challenge. And so oftentimes I don't personally like to take, sponsored legislation, because I just don't know necessarily, what's the motive or what the outcome is intended when it comes to legislation. And my team usually drafts the legislation based off the issues that are in the district and beyond. And so I think similarly, that's kind of what that's what we got to be able to do to tackle these challenges. But specifically to really, again, we can really limit the impact to you all. But it's, again, the challenge is getting that legislation through, and it's going to require a lot more activism.
Let's see, just clicking through here to see if there's anything else that I'm missing in these Q&As. Sorry, another question for you, Senator. It says a climate bond will be an important opportunity to invest in solutions discussed today, like land access, farmland conservation. We're hearing the Senate has formed a working group to develop the Senate's climate bond proposal. How can we best influence that working group and the Senate's climate bond proposal, especially as it relates to all these issues? It's a little bit of breaking news question for you there.
Yeah, I personally think that obviously reaching out to our office, feel free to do so at any time. We have a little link on our website where you can go in there and provide legislative input. We track that, we take that into consideration, we push it forward if we're able to. There's the ability to have Senate Ag Committee hearings where we can talk about this a little bit more in depth of what needs to be put into there. Again, I think that the political climate at the moment is, I think that there's a lot of frustration out there, right? I think we're all feeling frustrated with the state of everything in across the state of California. And so we're seeing it in terms of, low turnout when it comes to the upcoming election. We're seeing it when it comes to different proposals that are on the ballot. I think the sentiment is they're not trusting policymakers in what's being put on there to be able to move, to get these things that we need for our state. And so getting the input in, I don't think that's so much of a challenge. I think that getting it approved by the voters is going to be an uphill battle.
In order to make sure that we end on time for everyone, I want to start transitioning towards just giving everyone a chance to have some closing remarks here. And I guess just to kind of guide those thoughts, I just want to know, like, what solutions do you think California should be pursuing in order to both preserve agricultural land in the state and support small farmers? Let's see, Robbie, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. I think we need to look at really establishing, and I think CAF plays a really important role in this, like establishing what are the goals, what are the needs of small farmers and rural communities, and really building on that structure both on local levels again and on the state level. And I think, we really, there also needs to be an awareness of the level of corporate ownership and hedge fund ownership of California's farmland. I would say, most people are completely unaware of who owns the food and also like where their food's coming from. And so that connect with consumer and consumer education is really, really important as we try to work towards this new vision. It's really, really key. And I'll just throw this in just as an example of a community coming together. Cuyama is a community of less than 2,000 people. But they've taken a really strong stand, and it was like a light bulb going off when the people in the community, other farmers who've been there for generations, farm workers, realized that Grimway and Bolthouse, the two largest corporations in the world, were completely taking advantage of they're taking all of our water, and they're also now suing all of us. And they launched a carrot boycott against Grimway and Bolthouse. And you can go to standwithkuyama.com and find out more about it. But it's just an example of locals really taking an activist approach to put to really support the communities that we live in.
Alexis, would you like to say anything?
I think what I'd like to just end with is that while we all have different spheres of interest, and it's such a complicated and complex topic about small farms and land access and saving farmland. But I think that one way to see it with a vision that's very collective, that we can all wrap our minds around, is to understand that your small farmers and the work that they do is really about food security. And we may not have a pandemic again, I hope not, but there may be an earthquake, there may be some natural disaster, there may be something that interferes with supply chains again. And it behooves everybody to hold on to and support the continuation of small farmers to be able to do business and to be able to hold on to their land, because we can live without a lot of things, but we need to eat. I mean, that's so fundamental to everybody, that it's your small farmers who will be able to quickly and rapidly, with just 1 degree of separation, move into the community and give them that food security they'll need in a crisis. So, but those are not things that can just be created in a moment of need. They have to already be established and also have to be viable and functioning and have a healthy financial economy, so that if things don't go well and we do need to kind of level up, they're already established and able to move into communities and feed them. And so as just a simple food security issue, I think that we have to look at our small farmers in this way, as our what's the word, frontline, right there along with, police and firefighters and all our first responders. It's our farmers, our small farmers as well.
Senator, do you have any thoughts on this? And I also want to use this opportunity to pull in a question that popped up in the Q&A right as we started the closing remarks. But you mentioned too about how farm workers are often part of this. When we're talking about it, we're in this conversation, and how some of the small farmers trying to transition into owning their own farms are they are farm workers trying to now move into being their own small farmers. So again, if you have any closing thoughts about what kind of solutions should the state be pursuing to assist those small farmers, or just preserving our current agricultural ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. If too much to Alexis' point, I really do believe that what's going on in California is a national security issue, where land grabs is something that it's a serious big issue that we're facing here, and not enough people are talking about it besides those that are being impacted by it. And soon enough, if we don't stop the bleed, everybody's going to be talking about it. And we don't want to get to that point, right? We have to be able to stop what is going on. And again, I know that we have some legislative efforts that we're pushing through. I don't know if they'll be successful. As you all know, we have a huge budget deficit. And I think that honestly, in large part, that has been because of change in ownership. A lot of these purchases of land have been 1031 exchanges. So we haven't been, we're not collecting capital gains tax on these purchases because they're considered 1031 exchanges. So that's impacting, I think, to a certain extent, our budget as well, and which really even further limits our ability to provide resources to help small farmers. But I think the most pressing issue, at least for me right now, is stopping the bleed, which I think is really stopping or trying to bring the attention that is needed. And while legislation may not get through, something that I have been working on alongside the legislation is reaching out to the US DOJ. I've done it twice before with colleagues in terms of water rights abuses. I think it's all connected in terms of land grabs as well. I've asked to see if they would consider being part of a hearing. They didn't. They said they weren't necessarily open to that, but they were opening to having a listening session with farmers, and I think that is just a huge thing. That what is occurring is probably not legal, and while legislation may not solve the problem, I think that the US DOJ has the ability to come in and step in if there's wrongdoing, which I think there is, but we gotta make the case. And so I want to make sure that as we secure a listening session, that you all get the information so you can participate, because I think it's important for them to hear from you. And they have the ability to subpoena, they have the ability to do all these things that really we don't really have the authority to do. So that's what we're working on. I've already provided some information in terms of what's going on with the with the GSAs, with Sigma, and how that's impacting farmers. Of course, I would love to hear some more feedback and input from farmers beyond the Central Valley, because I think it's just a little bit different in different parts of the state. But I think that there's some reoccurring themes in what's going on, and so I've sent that over, and hopefully sometime soon we'll be having some sort of listening session with the DOJ to be able to hear from you of how this is all impacting you, and then we can go from there. I think there's also a good opportunity with the farm bill that hasn't necessarily been finalized. I think that we need to just kind of have our little agenda and be ready to work together to push for additional resources and support there. And I'm happy and willing to work with you all, and I hope that I can continue to hear from you in terms of how we can work together on these issues. And thank you for having me today.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for such a great conversation. And there was also a great conversation occurring in the chat. So thank you to our very engaged audience. It's been great. Jamie, I can throw it back to you.
No, just thank you all. Thank you so much, Senator, for making the time. We know you were extremely busy. And of course, to our wonderful farmers, Alexis and Robbie, you guys have really held it down from the small farmer take. Really appreciated the conversation. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.
Nicole.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you. Nice meeting everyone. Have a good evening.